Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Kira Proctor and I'm the Managing Director here at the Proctor Group. So today we're going to be discussing building safety for future generations. So really we want to be discussing best practice for the Building Safety Act across the industry. You know, some topics such as how it's being adopted, adhered to, and what we can learn from it. So our panel of experts will be exploring a range of topics and responsibility, risk, and managing the collaboration as to how we can deliver that best practice safety management. So I will shortly be asking them to introduce themselves. But just a little bit of housekeeping. So as some of you know, if you've been at our webinars before, we will try our best to answer all of your questions. Please post them live here on the YouTube feed. You can email us webinar@proctorgroup.com, or you can DM us at proctorgroup at Twitter, which is there. The handle's there on the screen in front of you. We did put out for the first time an option to give questions in advance when you signed up. So we have a good number already, which is fantastic, but keep them coming. If you want to get in touch with us after the webinar, you can do that on our webinar page, and there'll also be an email out to watch the replay, or you can obviously send that on to colleagues and anyone else you think it may be of interest to. And personalised CPD certification is available at the same link. If you enjoy the webinar, it really helps us if you give us a thumbs up or subscribe to our channel, and that will keep you informed of anything else that we have coming. So we've got a great range of webinars this year, and dates to come for those. So please subscribe and you'll be kept informed. So I'm going to start with Iain Fairnington. If you can just give us, what I'm going to ask each member on the panel to do is just introduce yourself and give a sort of 2-3 minute kind of lightning talk on this topic, if you can, please. So morning, Iain.
Morning, Kira. Morning, everybody. Looking forward to this today. The Building Safety Act has been an interesting one for us. Obviously, I've been with the company for 32 years, and I've seen lots of changes in those 32 years. Working with Proctors, we're a family-based company, so we strive to do everything correct. But certainly since the tragic events of Grenfell, 14th of January 2017, we're certainly having to tighten up and make sure that we're keeping with those principles of making sure what we say is correct, which we always have, but it is a bit more strict. And I think it's been a good wake-up call to the industry, that things perhaps weren't happening the way they should have, and there was a bit of a relaxed attitude towards building and construction industry. And I think now the Building Safety Act will help with that, and certainly we will hope to see it from our competitors that we're all playing by the same rules. So yeah, I'm looking forward to today, and it should be an interesting day.
Okay. Thanks, Iain. Clare, if I can come to you next, please, that would be fantastic.
I'm Clare Fenton. I'm a Principal Facades Manager at Wates. I'm also Chair of the Metal Cladding and Roofing Manufacturers Association, the MCRMA. I sit on the Joint Competency Initiative, and I also lead on the super sector, which is installer competence and trying to develop frameworks. So I would not call myself an expert, but I certainly have been involved in lots and lots of conversations around this topic that I really hope that I can give some insights. I feel that I'm probably like somebody else, more boots on the ground rather than technical. And I'm hoping that my input today will be very much the reality of it in that delivery process. I'm currently supporting my teams and the supply chain in delivery of safer and better buildings. And one of the fundamentals I look at is the occupants and the people working in these buildings now, rather than just the structures. And I think if we could start looking at things from that perspective, it might make us all a little bit more thoughtful in the decisions we make. But yeah, I'm really interested. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. And I think as many of these conversations that we can have to engage the wider audience are really, really important.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you for being here. Peter, good morning.
Morning. Can you hear me okay?
We can. Go ahead.
Good. So, yeah, from our perspective as fire engineers, I think the Building Safety Act, it represents one of the most significant shifts in building regulation in recent history. And how, as an industry, we approach fire safety. And as fire engineers, it's this legislation, it reshapes our responsibility, our methods and accountability within the industry. I think as fire engineers, our main goal is life safety, property protection, and business resilience as part of how we approach projects. But achieving it requires a little bit more than just following the rules. If you like, it's a case of it's applying guidance, solutions, how we implement them, and making sure that they're fit for purpose. And it means adapting best practice to each project's unique challenges, if you like, and while maintaining the highest professional standards as engineers. And I think no single fire engineer works in isolation. The success of the projects and the success of us as engineers, it depends on how well we collaborate with manufacturers, suppliers, specific clients, and installers. And each stakeholder plays a role. And it's critical that responsibilities are clearly defined. And by ensuring accountability across the board, we prevent any assumptions and we avoid gaps in safety, and we can actually make a difference. And I think this is one of the keys with the Building Safety Act, is making sure that we're actually achieving all of these. And at the end of the day, when we get to the golden thread, all of these things feed into that golden thread, and they give the end user something that they can actually see and make sense of. But it has to be in a way that it's understandable by the end user as well. It can't just be random information that's never seen by anyone again. So the relevance of this information we feed into golden thread has got to be useful. It's got to be usable by the end building operator, if you like. And I think the Building Safety Act is definitely, it works towards this, about making it a useful end product almost.
Thank you, Peter. And we know who you are, Peter, just in case there's anyone attending the webinar that doesn't. Peter is a fire safety specialist at Part B. And people may want to follow up with you guys afterwards. I don't know. I'm sure they'll find you on LinkedIn, just in case anyone didn't recognize you.
Yeah, apologies. Yeah, it's I'm currently an associate director and a practicing fire engineer.
Thank you, Peter. Gavin, good morning.
Morning, Kira. Thank you. Morning, all. I'm Gavin Hoccom. I'm a partner in the construction team at Browne Jacobson. We're a law firm with over 700 lawyers providing a full range of legal services from 7 offices across the UK and Ireland. I'm part of the leadership of our cross-discipline, cross-sector building safety group, which supports clients nationally to assess the organisational and personal risk presented by the new regulatory regime. And as ambitious and far-reaching as that new regulatory regime may be, it seems to me that the first priority for improving building safety and compliance, collaboration, and embedding a culture of safety in the built environment for future generations has to be knowledge and understanding. It's nearly 3 years on from the coming into force of the Act, but it remains clear from my day-to-day engagement with industry that there still remains a lack of knowledge and understanding regarding the changes which have been implemented. Common misconceptions, which I still hear day to day, are that the Act is only relevant to cladding and the tallest of residential towers, and that it impacts only the principal designer and principal contractor, which are referred to in the context of the CDM role rather than the building regs duty holder role. And in fact, the procedural requirements of the building regs and the HRB procedures regs, which came into force over 12 months ago in England, often still seem to come as a surprise to many. It's only when stakeholders on all sides of the table have taken ownership for establishing a baseline of knowledge and understanding of both building and fire safety regulation within their organisations that there can be meaningful progress within industry to prioritise collaboration over conflict when it comes to ensuring building safety now and for future generations. And hopefully over the next hour or so during this panel, we can start to think about how stakeholders may come together to prioritise that collaboration.
Excellent. Thank you, Gavin. And last but not least, Will, just introduce yourself and...
Morning, Kira. Morning, everyone. So yeah, I'm Will Jones. I work in the business development team here at the Proctor Group. This topic is obviously extremely important for us, not just as a company, but for my team. Our responsibilities really lie in that we're kind of taking and developing products and systems and delivering those to the market by way of specification. So it's highly relevant that we have a sort of a key understanding to the Building Safety Act and how it's going to affect what we do, especially in regards to the competency of our team and how we deliver that information. So yeah, I've been in the industry for best part of sort of 22 years, and I've seen some changes in that time. Most of my roles have sort of developed through manufacturers and suppliers, so it's always been very, very interesting to me how we go about developing specifications. I've worked in a technical department at the other end of the phone. I've worked in a marketing department where we're kind of trying to understand and get in the heads of the specifier and understand what makes them tick and why we want them to specify certain products and why they want to specify certain products. I then worked in sales, a bit more high pressure, trying to get the sales in. There's obviously impacts there. What comes first? What first and foremost? Obviously, making sure we're delivering the correct products to the projects that we're working on. And I've worked in a lot of product development and system development roles, such as the one I do now. So across all those kind of key roles from a supplier's point of view, it's highly important we fully understand this moving forward. And like I say, how we deliver that information to our clients, to our customers, and to the market. Competency comes up a lot. How do we prove that we're competent? I'm looking forward to sort of getting involved and stuck into some conversations today regarding that. But I think the Building Safety Act just calls for a wider understanding. If I go back to when I was working in that technical department, I just saw a drawing. I'd talk about a drawing, and that's really all I was looking at. I wasn't looking at a building. I wasn't looking at a working building that had people living, working, day-to-day lives, what's going on in that building afterwards. So I think it's quite eye-opening when you understand that, yeah, what you're doing and the impact it has further down the line to a particular specification, to the final building. It's really quite interesting, and that for me is why I feel this topic is really, really important. And yeah, I'm looking forward to getting stuck in.
Good, thank you, Will. Okay, so just for the panel, we'll keep the conversation quite fluid. Please feel free to jump in. So if I do direct a question at one of you, and if you have a comment and I don't happen to notice, just jump in, please, and give your opinion on it if you have something to say. So don't hold back. So I suppose, Clare, I mean, how can a supply chain drive best practice and ensure this long-term compliance?
I think firstly, and I think Will touched on this a bit, is they've got to look inwardly, look at their own operations, see if they recognise good practice, they've got their house in order. When we talk about competency, have they looked at the competency of their workforce and discovered where the gaps are? Now, that is a topic we'll touch on later, I'm sure. But I think one of the biggest fear is that they will find gaps, and where do they go for that element to fill in those gaps? And I think that's where there's a big shortfall at the moment. And I think this is where manufacturers can play a big part. You know, they're your products, your knowledge. You have the ability to train the installers or the designers or the architects around your products. So I think that we need to start looking at what resources you have and what resources you can build around that support mechanism. I also think that you need to take a look at documentation and marketing of products. Is it all clear and straightforward? I'm working on some projects where I'm asking for certificates and I'm being provided with them, but a product might have been rebranded, or there might be a little bit of confusion about certain elements, and I'm being given more and more documentation. I think really looking at what information you provide as a manufacturer to the supply chain is another way that you can really help support easier delivery and easier navigation around your products, because they are very, very complex, and sort of standard requirements are that you test and test and test. How do you present that in a way that's easily digestible for your supply chain?
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. I think it's one of the ongoing challenges, just how this information is kind of deciphered so that it is transparent and understandable to all the stakeholders involved.
Could I just jump in there?
Please,
I just
Peter.
want, from a fire engineering point of view, that it's a very good point. Very often when we're working, particularly with external walls, if I'm honest, and also in expert witness cases, when we're looking at information and testing information that comes through to us, it can be very vague sometimes. And even when we get certain documents through to us, they will be out of date. So we'll have different dates compared to when the building was constructed, or different test dates for when the products are actually procured. And you have to do a lot of digging and a lot of investigations to see exactly what you have there. And sometimes it doesn't line up. And the issue you have with this is the actual contractor doesn't understand what they have in front of them, and they can be issuing you with completely out of date or incorrect documents. And it causes a lot of confusion. And it's a little bit of education sometimes for the contractor to understand exactly what they're supposed to be supplying to us.
Can I just, sorry, Gavin, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just realising I don't tend to use Zoom, and I'm not sure how to put my hand up. But there you go. You spotted me unmuting. I was just going to add to this perhaps a broader theme, which is clarity and commonality, because again, a continuing complaint that I've heard from stakeholders, particularly on the manufacturing, supplier and subcontractor or subconsultant side, is that there's no certainty or consistency in the expectations of building control, the regulator, and then organisations within project supply chains with regards to what is required to satisfy the competing regulatory requirements of each stakeholder, both in relation to competency and in terms of demonstrating compliance with the various duties and obligations that fall within the procedural requirements, the building regs and the HRB procedures regs. And it seems to me that there must be more that can be done within the subsectors of industry, whether it's within building envelopes, whether it's within fasteners, whatever subsector of industry it's in, to do more to drive that certainty, that consistency as to what everyone expects within the project supply chain, and then to build off that to start to resolve a range of issues along the lines of those which Clare and Peter are referring to.
Gavin. And leading on from this conversation, actually, Iain, a question's just come through on YouTube here. Good one for you to answer things. So how does suppliers or APG ensure that testing we have will be done adequately to be fit for purpose?
Yeah, it's a good question. Fit for purpose always leads me to think you need a BBA certificate. I don't know whether that's just in my mind that's what our salesmen keep telling us. But you know, we do have to strive to ensure post Grenfell we had products in the fire products before Grenfell, but post Grenfell we've went through quite a steep learning curve, and that's been useful. It's always interesting to learn, so that has been great in terms of learning. So we've had better engagement with fire engineers, fire testing institutes. Has been great. We've set up our own fire and facades innovation group, which has great input and market information coming from the external team and Will's team, telling us what's happening in the market. which has been really good to see where we're going to put our efforts in terms of product development and testing. So there's always new fire tests we could do. We've engaged with fire consultants Part B to help sense check some of the things we think, and we think it's right. And it's always good to work with actual experts in it just to make sure that what we're saying is the right thing. So it's always difficult to make sure that you're doing the right testing. We are, in our mind, doing the right testing to show compliance. That's what we do with these good fire consultants and fire institutes that we're working with.
Yeah, agree. And I think that the good thing is that I think there's a much better understanding of the level of responsibility that all stakeholders have across the whole supply chain now, and what we need to do, for our training. And Will, just a very general question for you here. I don't want to leave you out. Do you think that there's been sufficient changes being made in this arena since Grenfell?
I think a great deal has been done to bridge the void since Grenfell. Regulations have been made less ambiguous, but I do feel that in certain areas there's still some ambiguity, and more can be done there to make them a bit more black and white. From a manufacturer's perspective, we do just want to be giving open and honest advice, and sometimes it can be a little bit confusing as to the requirements of a product or a system or a test certificate. I think CCPI has been a great addition. It's been worthwhile for us as a business going through that. I know it's been tough, but it's been really, really interesting and enlightening. I'd actually encourage more companies to go through that process and understand the impact that will have on the language that you're using as a business in your sales and marketing, but also your technical brochures as well. I think that's been really, really important change or new thing that's been sort of driven. And also the introduction of the building safety regulator, I guess that's been very positive. We've got the new gateway post process. Whether that's seen as a positive or a negative thing, hopefully will be up for discussion today and probably forever. But the main thing is the idea is to help prevent specification changes without a clear understanding as to why those specs have been changed or products have been switched out. So yeah, I think we're certainly getting there. I guess one way you could flip it on its head and say, were these sort of things kind of in place prior to obviously what's happened, but just weren't being managed correctly or weren't being sort of enforced correctly? I guess that's a question we could maybe hit on a bit later. But yeah, I think there has been certain progress, good progress over the last sort of 5 or 6 years. Does that answer that?
It does. Thank you very much. Claire, Greg Robertson has asked, what practical steps can the supply chain take to improve delivery and accountability?
I think Will's touched on something. CCPI is a really good initiative where it does take your products and make them more understandable, not only to the wider audience, but to your own teams, so that everybody in your organisation knows what they should be talking about and how they should be presenting things, and also making sure that everybody in your team understands the products that they're promoting. I think when we're looking at products, we need to look at how auditable things are. Going back on Will's point about around building regs, how clear are building regs, and is there room for us to push more on the supply chain to look at what they can report on rather than what they can comply with? Because I'm dealing with regularly people putting things forward because they align with building regs, but in fact they are difficult to follow in an audit trail. So I think things like cavity fire barriers, etc., we really need to start looking at regulations around those, because we are in a situation where we can comply with regulations, but we wouldn't have that, as I say, audit trail. I'm not sure, again, whether that answers the question, but and whether anybody else wants to build on that.
I think with building regulations, it is always a difficult balance because the building regulations are purposely open to interpretation to an extent. So we can make buildings that all vary. They're not all sort of a concrete box with two stairs at either end. And they do vary to give us a certain allow us to have a certain amount of interpretation to do different things and build buildings in a different way. And it's something we come across quite a lot in industry where people look at building guidance such as ADB, which is the obvious one, if you like, but also 9999, 9991, particularly the most recent one. And people will often misquote them as building regulation when actually they're guidance. There's no legal requirement to follow them, but they are essentially a best practice, if you like, or a route to compliance. But something like ADB will actually tell you itself its purpose is for a simple building, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to comply with the building regulations. And this is where a little bit of ambiguity starts to sneak in. And I've even seen a particular expert witness case I did where they had met all the requirements of ADB, but essentially failed to meet the building regulations on a technicality. So it's a very difficult question to answer sometimes as to whether something meets the building regulations. And the BSR themselves are tripping over this a little bit through the gateway process because they're seeing something outside of a building guidance and they're saying, does it meet the building regulation? And they're asking for justification. But then when they get a justification, they still struggle with being able to determine if it meets the building regulation because of that ambiguity. And I think it's true. And the same, like you were mentioning, cavity barriers. I mean, we rely solely on test information. We have guidance telling us minimum requirements. I have to be honest, I think the industry has accelerated beyond the guidance. The guidance gives you a certain fire resistance for a cavity barrier. But most of the time on remediation, we see buildings having an uplift to their standards or to their resistance requirements. And it's interesting to see the actual industry accelerating beyond building regulations in some areas, particularly Regulation 7, where we look at something like membranes, for example, where we've got a Class B under ADB, but actually people are producing better than that, A2, A1 membranes in some cases, probably more A2. But it shows that the industry is accelerating beyond the building regulations to an extent.
Can I just add to that a little bit in that touching on something Gavin mentioned in his introduction, I think this is where collaboration is important because the information that we've been presented with is open to interpretation and is very challenging. I know where my competency ends, and I'm in a fortunate position now where I work for a large organisation and I can bring in the relevant parties to assist me in navigating those difficult challenges. And I'm also in a position now where I can, again, going back to the first question Kira asked, where we can support that supply chain by asking them where does your competency end and where can we bring in consultants or specialists to fill those gaps. And I think that's, if anything that I want to take away from the introduction of the Building Safety Act is that you're now accountable to understand where your competence is and where it ends. And don't be frightened to say, I don't know, or to pause or to walk away from something while you gather more information. There's a lot of pressure in our industry to be put on the spot and be expected to answer at that moment. And I think we need to just move away from that and give everybody a bit of space and time. But it's been a really interesting and rewarding position I've been in to see that, if you go out and you get the right support, not only do you expand on your knowledge, but you walk away with the confidence. I mean, I've supported people that have been pretty aggressive, but then have been quite proud because all of a sudden they've got the confidence that the information they're putting forward is backed up by solid evidence or support or knowledge. And I think that's quite key in that. And I think the collaboration element is quite a critical thing that we could maybe have a bit of a talk around.
I just wanted to add one point off the back of what Peter was saying in terms of the lack of clarity, or the ambiguity rather, in determining what does and does not comply with the relevant requirements of the building regs. And just as a brief point, in response to the question that was originally put to Clare, I think we see all too often situations where manufacturers are being asked to retrospectively demonstrate why a given detail or a given product in a particular application with a given interface with a particular part of the project complies with the relevant requirements, the building regs. And the focus on that, compliance with the relevant requirements, the building regs, is only going to increase because that is the threshold that's set now within the procedural requirements, the building regs and the HRB procedures regs. And it seems to me that there are those manufacturers out in industry who I think could benefit by investing resource in proactively not only producing their construction product information packs by whatever pathway they choose to do that, but also by thinking about creating the logic links, both generally and on a project specific basis, proactively, so that they can go to the table and more clearly from the outset demonstrate how those requirements are satisfied. And that then aligns with golden thread requirements in the context of HRBs, but also then the golden thread that we should be looking to establish for every project.
Thank you, Gavin. Appreciate that. There's a question here about AI, and you look like, sorry, did you want to add on there if you just want to unmute?
Sorry, if I can. There's a few things I wanted to say there on the panel's discussions. Clare, yeah, I think it is okay to say you don't know. And that's sometimes one of our hardest challenges with particularly the external sales force, and hopefully they won't lambast me for saying that, but you know, the external sales force, when you're out there, feel sorry for them, they're out there on their own and they're asked a question, and it's trying to tell them that it's okay to say you don't know and bring that question back to head office and we'll inform them. And I think that does, as Clare says, that gives the specifier or the customer a lot more confidence rather than bluffing it, which might have been more of a traditional salesman's position in the past.
Not a Proctor group, but perhaps.
Obviously, obviously not Proctor's or indeed Will's team, you know, but, you know, I think it is okay to say no, and that's what we try to teach people. It's all right to say you don't know. The other thing I would mention was, Peter, it's quite interesting that you were talking about Class B, and that manufacturers are providing better products in terms of Class A, which is correct. But what I think you need to take into consideration is the holistic approach to a building envelope, whereas you can get a Class A, but it might not work as well as a Class B in terms of vapor permeability, for example, or water holdout. So a Class B could be argued to be better in the whole holistic build-up of the building envelope than a Class A. So I think we have to be careful in saying it's better. It's better in terms of fire performance, but not necessarily better in terms of the building envelope. Not that I'm teaching you to suck eggs, Peter, but you know, I'm just making that point that yes, you're right, there is Class A products, but there is some good Class B products as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and there are occasions when we see this, and with like EDPM products, and also when we see thermoplastic products around damp courses at the bottom of walls. Very often, or balconies are a typical one where you see them on balconies or terraces, and you think actually the damage caused trying to remediate something like that from a damp point of view is far greater than any fire risk that would arise from a detail like that. And very often we'll turn around and say, you know what, leave it as it is, particularly with holistic assessments. Yeah, when we're doing remedial works off the back of PAS 9980 assessments and things like that. And we'll very often look at them and say the risk to damp is far greater than any fire risk that could ever come from that product. So I totally agree with you, absolutely. I think I'm just sort of touching on sort of what's out there, if you like.
And to be fair, we do both. So yeah, it's an interesting concept. But I agree with you, Ian, in terms of the holistic approach. And as you said, Peter, it's important to take in, consider all the different considerations when you're looking at the build-up. I'm just going to address some of the ones on the YouTube because these are coming in live. James has asked, and I wonder, Clare, if you could start with this one again, just given your role. What role can industry trade organisations play in supporting compliance in the new regulatory landscape?
I think they're a good point of information. They're not dissimilar to what we're doing today, a place where you can have fairly safe conversations. You can challenge decisions that have been made. We've got some new legislations coming through, which have caused a lot of unintended consequences. And being part of a trade organisation, we've been able to come together with a group of people to put forward reasoning and responses that are sensible and reasonable. In the same way, I know that Ian's just mentioned, sometimes something sounds like it's the best option, but it does cause other problems. So that's what an organisation can bring. But it is that constant source of information. I would recommend anybody out there to be part of something which is feeding you information. I'm lucky enough to have engaged with Gavin in the past in my role as chair of the MCRMA, and what Gavin did for us was he took the sort of secondary legislation that came from the Building Safety Act and translated it for our manufacturers. So instead of them having to contend with 100+ page documents, he pulled out the relevant elements for them and put it into a context which was sort of resonated and also highlighted where their responsibilities lay and what various words in different contexts meant to them, whereas if they read it in a document as a standalone, they might not have interpreted it that way. I also think that organisations will have a big part to play moving forward. I think that they'll start to sort of stand up more and be maybe a part of the competence landscape. So I think that if you're not a member of an organisation, then you are always going to be chasing the information, or your staff will not have a point to refer to as well. I find that the forums are some of the most interesting and informative spaces to be in, and it gives you those opportunities to speak with people in your field outside of your own organisation. So
it's just that kind of organic exposure, isn't it, to what's happening, because you'll have people from all walks within the industry. There are people who are on the sites, people who are behind the drawing board, people who are part of the regulatory bodies, etc. So it's probably a really untapped resource that more people should use. I agree.
And also, there's so much knowledge in those organisations that you won't find anywhere else. But it's also the sizes of the businesses. So you might have very, very small, even micro-sized companies up to large multi-billion-pound organisations, all having the same discussions. And in the MCRMA, I see a sort of element of mentoring as well, where it's not, I mean, not saying that the manufacturing industry isn't competitive, because I know it is. But there is this element of sharing. We feel like we're in this together, and you do feel you've got a support mechanism around you.
Gavin, did you have something to add?
Yeah, if I may, I mentioned earlier the need for stakeholders to prioritise knowledge and understanding, but that is made challenging by the disparity in the accuracy, the quality, and the scope of the know-how and the learning materials that are out there. And of course, accessing those materials looks different in the context of what Claire just mentioned for a micro entity within the sector through to a tier one. But it seems to me that industry and trade organisations are uniquely placed within the space to collaborate as between themselves, and in some cases have the reach to engage with central government and the regulator to deliver that cohesive, easy to access source of truth for know-how and understanding in relation to building safety, which, taking the point you both just mentioned, is or can be directed not only to senior leadership teams, as is often the case, but through the trade organisations to every individual, whether they be working on site, whether they be part of the design team or a pre-con team within the office, or within management, etc. So there's absolutely a part to play for industry organisations on the knowledge and understanding side, but also more generally in terms of championing, driving awareness of building safety regulation across the sector. And I suppose potentially even taking a leadership role, as I said earlier, within each organisation's specific subsector to support the development of commonality in terms of competency expectations within that organisation space, because they do understand and they can speak to the technical requirements of the building regs, but also the broader interpretation of those requirements that Peter was speaking to earlier. So it seems to me that there is more that industry and trade organisations can be doing in a very positive way to support the sector and our ambitions in relation to building safety.
Absolutely. I see a small yellow hand up. I think it's Iain's.
I was just wanting to just touch on that. The trade associations, we're members of many trade associations, which we like working with the trade associations. What the benefit the trade associations have is that they can be more generic. So they might have lots of manufacturers of the same product, but a trade association can be more generic rather than having to fight the individual benefits of each product. And I think they can be a good resource for specifiers and builders to actually look at a more generic specification that will help them guide them down the right road.
It's the impartiality, isn't it? That, there's no agenda within these trade organisations. So, you could be sitting around the table as a manufacturer or a contractor, and everyone's got the same kind of voice and different opinions to share. So, one here on the chat, I missed a little bit earlier, from Tracy Smith. Do you feel manufacturers will be forced to share their test data in the future? Maybe you could have a go at that one between yourself and Iain.
It's an interesting one. Me and Iain have had recent discussions on this, actually, about trade, obviously being what we should be sharing, and I think we kind of we're on the same page with this now, Iain. Eventually, I think it's paramount, really, for the industry moving forward that we obviously share the correct information. Where I sometimes have an issue is it shouldn't be used as a shortcut for the client to get certain information. I get asked all the time, can I have all of your fire certification for a particular product? And they'll go and put that probably in a file somewhere on the desktop or somewhere. And it's not project specific. And that's what worries me. It kind of, if you share information in that kind of general manner, it kind of allows it to be misused, and not necessarily on purpose. It's the fact that it's not really then project led. So even if you've got a project which is very, very similar, or a build up which is very, very similar to something that you've done previous, that doesn't necessarily mean that, one, the information you have is relevant, two, it's in date, so three, is it relevant to that particular project? And I think it was touched on earlier by Gavin, having like a project pack. for me is kind of paramount moving forward. So we get involved in the discussions early at design stage. We make sure that us as a manufacturer supplier have a responsibility to share the correct information on the products that are being specified on a particular project, and that stays relevant to that project and only that project at that time. That's not to say it's not relevant to other projects, but I think we have to look at it from a project specific focus, in my opinion. And so you're not just sharing all your product information out and then it's kind of, oh yeah, I've heard about this product, it's got this certification, we'll be able to use it. What you don't want to do is to prevent or not encourage the designer to conversate with the supplier of that material in order to make sure the right products are being specified. So do I think they'll be forced to share their test data? I think they should already be doing that anyway. I think we just have to make sure it's not a case of, you have to share that data because you're now forced to do so, so give me all that data. It really should be on a project basis, I feel. And so does that make sense? So really, yes, you should be giving that information, but it should be relevant to what's being discussed and designed at that particular time.
Right.
Yeah. If I can just add to that, yeah, you're right. Well, we've had many discussions about it, and I must apologise for my age, even though I'm a young lad. I was very much old school with this, and in the 32 years before, we never gave customers any of our test information. We would give them a summary in the form of a BBA certificate, but having had the discussion with younger ones at the company, they've kind of taught me the way, the error of my ways. I went back and listened and thought, and I think I agree. If we've got testing, why not share that testing? We have, since I went through that breakthrough, I have entered an NDA with a company, and we will give them our test information. What is interesting about that NDA is that we've added a clause that we'll give you the information, but if you need to give it to your customers or your clients, you'll have to come back to us and make sure that we are happy and comfortable with that. And that makes me feel better. But I think before, my stance was, well, we've never done it before in the 32 years I've been at Proctor's. And I don't think that's a robust enough answer. We are different now than we were before. And we need to keep evolving. And I think we do have to share information. We just have to be careful, just as exactly what Will's saying, making sure it's the right information for the right project, and making sure that everybody is aware of the testing and how robust that testing has been. That's me.
I just wanted to add off the back of what you were saying, Iain, that there are obviously commercial sensitivities that come with disclosing test data, and I commonly see organisations within industry which are now more commonly taking the approach that you've just mentioned of disclosing that data under an NDA or similar. However, it's important just to flag perhaps that the current recommendation post Grenfell is that construction product manufacturers will be required to disclose openly their test data in the spirit of ensuring building safety for now and for future generations. So you've got comfortable as you've mentioned, but there may be more changes to come for all within the manufacturing sector.
And I was going to add to that on the construction reform paper that's going through. I think that covers that's under consultation at the moment, and that does, I think, state that companies will have to supply their support, the supporting test certificates, because when I'm issued with I do ask for the test certificates that support that, and we are interrogating it and going back to the example I gave earlier where a product had been rebranded. In essence, that the certificates that were supporting the BBA, it didn't match up, so they actually went back to their testing centre and got confirmation that it was tested in that instance with this. I can't remember what instance it was, but we had to go and get all of that confirmed. That's the level of interrogation that we're going to. And we're not asking for generic information, we're asking for project-specific information. And I think you'll get that more and more as we move forward. But I also just wanted to ask, I think, Will, when the CCPI did your audit, did they cover the certification, or was it just the marketing side of things?
I'll be honest, Claire, I don't think I can answer that. Do we know if the certification was taken into account, Kira or Iain, when we went through CPI?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure that it covered the certification as well, Claire, to be fair. And to be fair, the recent one that Iain's referring to with the NDA, that was more that particular build-up had other people's materials in it as well, which is why that was coming. But I think for us, it's not really that Proctor Group's just evolved, it's that the industry's evolved and the expectation and responsibility level of what you're going to share has evolved. So I think the fact that these fire tests can and should be made available to the particular specification or project that's being worked on is really important. Now, what we wouldn't want to do is, as Will said earlier, send someone every, let's say we've done 20 fire tests on different build-ups, send someone them all and just, you figure out, these are big meaty documents with different build-ups and everything. So really, I think what manufacturers need to be doing is looking at that particular scenario with the fire engineer, with the specifier, and looking at what that build-up is, and then producing the reports based on what has been carried out that are relevant, because otherwise you're just going to be confusing people. If you like.
And that's absolutely right. Sorry, I was just going to say that's absolutely right, because it's consistent with what the building regs and the higher risk building procedures regs are framed to do, which is to drive compliance within the context of a specific project. And there are building regs, principal contractors, building regs, principal designers out there who need to take that into account, and in the spirit of looking to collaborate with the supply chain, stop making requests, as Will has alluded to, for everything. That is not the purpose of what the regulation has been brought in to do. As Kira said, in fact, that can be unhelpful, because it is such a volume of information that if it falls as past the golden thread, it's of no use to occupiers and residents in 2, 3, 5 years' time, because who can interpret it? Having that project-specific pack of info, including the test data for the relevant application and interfacing of the product, is all that should be required. But we are still seeing that conflict where those at the top table within the supply chain are just putting out blanket generic requests for info. And frankly, that's not manageable going forward for industry.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Gavin. I think that wholeheartedly. Having had my awakening, the next question's been, right, so can we put all this on the website? Now, the fear would be just exactly what you're saying, Gavin. It's just a whole load of tests, and Kira made the point as well, 20 through-wall fire tests. What benefit is that to anybody? It's not project specific and can't be, it's just overloading too much information. So I would tend to agree with what Will said as well, that project specific is more relevant than just a whole load of fire tests and pick which one suits you best. It's possibly more dangerous by having too much information.
Peter, did you have something that you wanted to add to that discussion?
Yeah, I was going to say, from our point of view, we don't tend to communicate directly with the suppliers for test information very often. It usually comes through architects more for us for the design stage. But what we tend to do these days, we won't accept a BBA certificate on its own. We want two forms of test certification, or better for us is to have the independent test itself. So you can see the actual 13501 test, for example, and have a look. And the one thing that we find really important and often gets overlooked is the limitations of a product. So we'll have products that are perhaps an A2 classification with limitations that may affect that. And again, it's something that I think would help contractors to understand is the limitations can actually cause them to trip up if they're not careful. By using the incorrect substrate, for example. That's one example that jumps into my mind, where you've got a specification for an SFS with an A2 rated board, but then you affix it back to a timber substrate and you potentially lose that A2 classification. And it's something we drill into people doing external wall assessments all of the time, and we actually provide training on this, and it's something we try to get across all of the time. This is a really tricky thing that you can trip up on, and it's something that's one of the reasons we're quite adamant about getting the test information, even to the frustration sometimes of clients who have several buildings with us. They may have 3, 4, 5, 6 buildings with us, and we ask for exactly the same information for every single building. They say, well, we've already sent it. We said, no, this is a different project. We want it again. And it's about keeping it up to date and keeping it relevant for each project.
Good. Thank you very much, Peter. And Claire, you were unmuted before. Did you have something else to add as well?
I was just going to say that when you mentioned the NDA, that is quite typical of the industry at the moment, and it's just sort of highlighting that it's a change everybody's got to go through. You know, I think sometimes when we talk about things, we're a little bit embarrassed when we're protecting our own interests, and we do have to protect your business's interests, but it isn't. I just wanted to highlight it. It's something that we see with lots and lots of organisations, and I think an open and transparent sort of future is potentially what we're looking at, and hopefully maybe some of the testing behind can sort of almost start to. I know that there's an element of looking at the testing sort of methods at the moment, and whether they can look at protecting your secret sources, for want of a better word, that sort of approach. But it isn't just you that's going through this change. It seems to be quite common. That was all I was going to say. And actually building on what Peter just said, and going back to being members of an organisation, we had a brilliant talk at our last one of our recent members meetings about coatings, and calorific values around coatings and colours, and how to read a certificate, because it might be that you're only covered if you've got a white paint and not a black paint on a particular product. But that education piece is quite important, because you're given a certificate, you'll take it, you won't interrogate it. So that education piece, being part of organisations, might give you access to those sort of informative presentations.
Good, thank you very much. Just jumping back onto some of the questions coming through in the YouTube feed. So Iain Lander, hi Iain, has asked, do we foresee a shift to more collaboration between manufacturers to provide system build-ups as a solution rather than independent products? So we can probably move away from the testing side after this question, I think. Is that something we're doing a bit more of, Iain?
Yeah, I think Ian's right. We would like to do more collaboration. I think we feel more comfortable, or certainly I feel more comfortable collaborating with another product in a system, rather than just talking about your product independently. So it's good to have collaboration with other suppliers. You know what their product can do, you know what your product can do, and you know what the products together can do. So I think it's more robust if you can collaborate. Sometimes not always easy, but if you can and you've got a good working relationship, I think that's perfect for helping you comply.
Yeah, I think as well for us, we love collaboration, and we like working with others, even down to competitors at times. But the challenge is that our customers all like to use different products in every area of that build up. So for example, you'll have some that are particularly loyal or like, a specific SFS, some that like a particular type of plasterboard, some that like this breathable membrane, and some that like this paper control layer, this insulation, that insulation. So I think for us, if we've maybe tested 10, 15 different build-ups, there's going to be tens more. So you can never quite get exactly what Mr. or Mrs. Smith likes for their exact build-up. But I think you can have enough representation, can't you, Will, across, you know, a kind of generic metal frame, generic type performance insulation in terms of what it needs to achieve fire-wise. So we can make our best guess at you know, educationally what the general industry is moving towards with our products.
Yeah, I totally agree. Certainly collaboration is key. I think that's kind of what we're all talking about here anyway. All being open with each other and you know, offering up product information, whether it be fire, whether it be its vapor permeability or whatever else it might be, obviously air tightness, that type of thing. It's important that we are working with others and collaborating with others. Fire testing obviously is a big part of that. You mentioned we can't physically test everything, and I mean we as an industry can't physically test everything, and there's always going to be new products hopefully that come to the market and sort of push the industry forward. So there's always going to be more and more testing to be done. I think we just have to be very, very clear on the requirements of the test. And I also think someone mentioned it earlier, sorry I've forgotten who, but actually focusing on the testing that's also currently available and whether that is now relevant and should that be updated, and understanding why we're testing in such a way and understanding why and what effect that has on products and systems. But yeah, it's all too easy just to pick a product and go, right, we have a class A, class B, class C, and then not understand how that product is going to interact with others within that build-up. So for me, collaborating and testing and delivering overall systems as opposed to individual products is the way forward.
And Gavin, do you think that we can expect to see greater reliance on more generic detailing as some manufacturers look to minimize risk, for example?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we're seeing a range of approaches by different organizations within the space. We are seeing some stakeholders who are providing, and then others at the top table who are requesting generic detailing in the context of high risk buildings. It seems on the basis, I think, of the potential misconception that it might make it easier to obtain building control approval at Gateway 2 and then go on to change or revise the detail during the construction phase. But in fact, the reality is the use of generic detailing is more likely, I think, to risk rejection by the regulator, because the exact interface, the performance of the detail will be unknown. It is more likely to have the potential to cause delay if changes are then required during the life cycle of the project. And I think more importantly, it's simply contrary to the ambition, which is to ensure building safety by creating an accurate golden thread of information, which from a regulatory perspective applies to HRBs only at the moment, but should be the objective for every project. And we've all, I think, spoken this morning to the point that you need to have that project specific detailing and information in order to actually achieve that ambition. So I think we might, through lived experience in England over the next 12-18 months or so, as projects either pass through Gateway 2 or are rejected and go through a refinement process, we might start to see that shift in trend towards using bespoke project-specific detailing, so far as it is necessary, because recognizing that there are cases where generic detailing is sufficient.
And Steve Skatesbrook, sorry, Steve, I'm not ignoring your comments. I'm reading them with interest, but I mean, Steve's comment that he's put on the YouTube feed, generic details are dangerous. It's so easy to cut and paste without the thinking by the detail. I think you've kind of touched on that a little bit there, Gavin, around how we might see a move towards more bespoke detailing in the future.
Yeah, agreed.
Good.
The thing is with the Gateway 2 is we do bespoke detailing more often than not, but much later in the process. It's just bringing that element of work forward and probably making life on site a little bit easier, and the extra time spent doing that work earlier on, you might find you save when you come to deliver the project. And there are, when you look at a building, there are going to be generic details that you can ignore. It's those interfaces. And if I was a building safety regulator, I know where I go straight to check whether, you know, that we've got the structural calculations, whether we've got the fire certificates, etc. So there's an obvious areas to immediately attack that will always need bespoke details. So although we're talking about bespoke versus generic, I think it's more that the position in the supply or the involvement of those people will be brought into the supply chain earlier. And I think for me, that's a benefit, because when I started in this industry 20 plus years ago, we would go to a meeting before the shovel had hit the ground and discuss these tricky details with everybody in the room, resolving the problem. And then there was a point around 2008 that there was this big shift towards design and build, and those conversations just disappeared and everything's pushed down the line. So I think we're almost going back to good practices that we used to use years and years ago.
And Clare, you're right, because what I think, again, there are stakeholders overlooking is the fact that the list of requirements in terms of documentation, information, etc. for Gateway 2 isn't finite. It's actually quite broad and open-ended if you read through it within the regulations themselves. And part of that was the effect of demonstrating compliance with all relevant requirements of the building regulations, which, going back to something we've touched upon this morning, is a real ask at that point in time. However, this isn't a planning stage, this is building control approval, and what Gateway 2 is essentially expecting is for the parties to come to the table with the complete design. And really, it's got to be complete if you're to be able to demonstrate that all relevant requirements of the building regs will be satisfied. So it really is bringing about a change in terms of how far you need to go down that pathway of design, development and output before you can think about going for building control approval. And again, it'll be interesting to see what lessons are learned over the next 12, 18 months as more projects pass through the gateways.
I'm loving the conversation and the comments both Clare and Gavin are making there. That's what we would like as manufacturers, and Will's team going out and getting the product specified. And always the problem is it a firm spec, is the question that's asked. And we'll go back to Clare's point about design and build in 2008. That confirmed spec was a thing of the past. And I think we're getting back to, hopefully, that when you get your product specified for a reason, because it meets the requirements and does what the job is required in terms of the building envelope, going back to the building envelope, as well as complying with the regs, it's good for the envelope. And I think that's can only be viewed as a good thing, rather than spec changing at a later date for a cheaper product. It's more likely there's a reason it's cheaper, and you're not getting what was originally designed. So I think it's a great thing if that work's done early. Everybody's helps with the supply of it. So it's great to hear, and I hope it's all going that way.
Thank you. Peter, did you have something to add earlier?
Yeah, I was just going to say about the gateway process. I think what we see of a lot of rejected applications is probably a sort of approach to the old school way of having a fire strategy plan, no formal fire strategy, and sort of going along with a generic detail and saying this is our gateway to application. I think at this point there's no place for generics with the gateway applications, because they're being quite prescriptive about the way they go about reviewing the information. And it'll be interesting to see how it evolves, if I'm honest. I don't agree with everything that's going on with the BSR at the moment, but it doesn't mean that the intent's not correct. And I think it needs to evolve over time now to actually allow people to have direct open contact with the BSR. I think that's something we need at the moment, because it's very difficult to actually speak to them and have a clear forum to have a discussion with the BSR, if you like, with the actual when you're going through the gateway process beyond emails. And I think that's something for the future that would perhaps help sort of lubricate the wheels a little bit to allow us to get through this process. But I think as far as generic detailing is concerned, there's really no place for it now in the gateway process. It doesn't really work for any kind of application to get your building through that requirement.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, just a couple more questions now as we start to wrap up. We've gone over the hour, so thank you for staying on, guys, to answer the questions. Had one here from via email. If I can ask you, Will, and then we'll come on to the roofing today question. What about after, Lee has asked, what about after a project is finished? How can manufacturers continue to support any issues or risks that the building may encounter?
Okay. I guess in the real world, once a project has been handed over, if that's the right terminology, there is we do experience a responsibility switch, but that doesn't mean that previous stakeholders aren't going to be devoid of any responsibility. I'd like to think that a lot of the discussions that we've had here today have kind of covered a bit of this, and I know I've mentioned the project pack, and I'll kind of come back to that. Making sure that an accomplished project pack has been created, and that then, from a manufacturer's point of view, that project pack that we've put together for that particular project is only a very, very small part of that project, and that's going to go on to sort of build an overall project pack for the building, with everybody's input, obviously across all different factors. That's going to help build a digital twin of the building, which is almost like a virtual model where all the relevant information is being held. So the performance, not just safety, but performance of the building is all in one place. And I'd like to think that the idea behind that is that clients, project owners, people that live or work at that particular building tenants, can use that information in particular instances where it's required. If we've got something that's happened, a particular like a fire breaks out, as for one of a better example, then that information should be available to the police, the fire brigade, and we've almost got like an overall building design package that's been created. And I guess just making sure that, most importantly, in the first instance, all of the correct information has been provided in our bit of project pack to make sure the overall project pack is complete. Obviously, if there's any particular issues that have happened in that building afterwards, there's a responsibility from a manufacturer maybe to come and have discussions. Maybe there's been a leak, or maybe there's been condensation. If I just talk about our products for a second, a condensation issue that may have occurred, we should be able to go back and revert to the condensation risk analysis that has been completed, or the WIFI analysis that's been completed, or U-value calculations, or whatever might have been done or should have been done in that complete project pack. So I guess what I'm getting at in a roundabout way is, most importantly, let's get it right at design stage, and that will hopefully make that kind of revisit at a later stage, if God forbid something was to happen, a lot easier. And that's where I think manufacturers should really be putting their emphasis, is all at design stage. And I guess that's what we're talking about today. Let's get it right in the first instance at Gateway 2, and that would lead to a lot easier process if anything was to happen at a later date.
Thank you very much. Wayne's also said, outdated forms and specifications on the internet can be tricky to overcome. And I'd agree with that. And I think, again, with a lot of companies hopefully moving their information to the cloud, I don't know how other businesses do it, but we'll have everything updated in one central area. And when it's updated at source, that's then communicated to our website, for example. But it's hard if other companies have digital assets. And how do they then update that Proctor or whatever product that they're dealing with on that particular project to make sure that that is updated and live? So there's a real responsibility to make sure that people are issued with new versions of any changes in terms of materials. Peter.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say that's something I've come across with fixings as well for cavity barriers. So the implementation of them has changed, but the manufacturer perhaps hasn't got the information out quick enough. And people have been installing them on buildings, and they're not fitted correctly as per the manufacturer's instructions. And it's just a case of they were running off an older set of instructions. And it's, for our point of view, we'd love it if the manufacturer would actually send these out and make it very obvious that something's changed or something, it's new information, new test data, something like that. For our point of view, it's frustrating when old documents are in circulation. Now, they'll never go away because they're online, but it'd be, from a contractor point of view, we'd like them to go to the manufacturer and say, give us your most up-to-date documents. And then when something changes in that document, to actually make it clear to the ongoing projects that are happening at that time that something has changed.
It's a great point. It's a great point. And it's actually a really tricky one to overcome, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it really is, yeah.
Roofing Today magazine has asked, is there a standard or recommended way for contractors to assess their competence and identify any gaps? So any competency auditing methodologies developed? So I'm not going to direct this at anyone in particular, but does anyone have anything to feed back on that? Clare?
There's frameworks being developed. The JCI have been looking at general competency throughout the building envelope sector, and they, I think, just last week, they piloted the baseline competency course for various people. We're not there yet. And then my work under the super sector looks at installer competence. And we've been working with industry to create frameworks of what competency is. Important to remind people competency isn't just a course. They talk about SCED, so it's the skills, the knowledge, the experience, and the behaviour. And actually, the knowledge is the easiest bit to capture, but that's where all the gaps are. How do we manage behaviour, for example, and who's going to be responsible for capturing experience? And I think Gavin was on a panel where somebody said to him, because I was in the audience, we all need to own our own competence. So as a starter, individually, we need to look at our own competence and know where our gaps are, and maybe push to our employer, or if we're self-employed, look to fill those gaps. As an organisation, you can look at your organisation competence. You can start to look at creating competency matrices, and I think there's some nice white papers out there, and the JCI white paper is particularly good because it does highlight lots and lots and lots of different roles, and sort of gives you an overview of what competency might look in those roles and what your continued learning should look like. It's also important to, again, pushing on the manufacturers to make sure your competence is specific to the project. So again, the particular type of facade that you're using, or roof, or whatever it might be, that your knowledge is relevant to that, whether it's previous experience or going out and getting extra sort of learning. And again, I look to the manufacturers to support the industry on that. So yes, there's a lot of work out there, and hopefully, certainly the super sector stuff on the for the installers is becoming more available. I think CITB have created some national occupational standards that have been developed by industry, and those are started to be piloted through some new course. The first one, I think, is just being released at the moment. That's the rain screen course. So yeah, it's all happening. So there's very much an industry response, and hopefully before long there'll be one sort of place where we can go to look to see what those frameworks look like. But be reassured, there's a lot of good players in the background doing a lot of hard work on these particular subjects.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I would just add to that, Clare. We have went through, as Will said earlier, the CCPI, and competency matrix was brought up, and how do you ensure that your staff are competent for certain levels of what they do and what they can say, etc. So we looked at competency matrix, and it's really quite difficult, and it's made us aware that I'm lucky that I've got a team of 5, including myself, and we're head office based. So we can take a new start in and train them up quite easily. And they're there, they'll be looked after. They've got somebody with them all the time to mentor them. What's more difficult is with the external sales team, where we have the training during the induction week. We give them the training, different levels. They then do online tests and seminars and they can pass the course. But then that doesn't mean to say they're necessarily competent for exactly what you're saying, Claire. It's not just the test, it's how they act in the job. And I think that's where Will and his team are very good at going with the salesmen and going out with them and making sure, yeah, they've got the knowledge, but they're adapting it right for each particular project. So it's difficult, but it's been a learning curve for us. And I think we're doing a good job. It won't be perfect yet, but we'll keep improving it.
And again, it goes back to something we discussed earlier with know the boundaries of your knowledge. You're not expecting your sales reps to understand the intricacies of every project or product. You would want them to know a certain amount. And then when they get asked a tricky question, they stop and they take it back to the office, because that's where their competency ends. So I think that's an important lesson learned from the sort of interactions I've had. And, don't answer something because you feel you're in the moment and you've got to answer it. You've got a big support team behind you. And if you've got those competency matrices in place, then obviously that's a reference point for them to go to get the right source of information. And it might be that level of competency sits outside your organisation as well. We need to understand that we've got a fire specialist here that, we can't ever pertain to have the knowledge that they've had, or Gavin's legal prowess. It's knowing that there's bigger resources outside that can be referred to. So
Absolutely.
know the limitations of your competence and own your competence.
Yeah. And don't be ashamed if it's not where you'd like it to be. Just be transparent and honest about it, I think. Okay, thank you very much. We're now a little bit significantly over time, so I just want to wrap up and again with a little bit more detail for our audience. So first of all, thank you very much to the panel for attending today and giving your expertise. There's a ton of knowledge that you've brought today, so we really, really appreciate it. And I wouldn't be surprised if people don't follow up with you. Hopefully you don't get too many questions via LinkedIn, etc. afterwards, but thank you for being part of it. The YouTube feed's going down the rabbit hole of AI now, so we'd love to have a chat about that at some point, but just not the time today. But thank you very much. And I thought Gary made a really good point when I think Claire and Gavin were chatting earlier. We have to know what we don't know, and that's one of the hardest part around what's going on in the industry at the moment. A couple of dates for the diary. So Proctor webinars will be back bi-monthly. So please just kind of put these as a placeholder in your diary if you'd like to attend. So Friday the 30th of May, usual time of 10 a.m. And I'm going to go as far as to say also Friday the 25th of July. So the 30th of May and the 25th of July, if you want to come along to another live webinar, please put them in your diary and we'll be sharing what the topics, etc. will be in due course. You will receive a follow-up email after today's webinar, which will be a little bit of a feedback form and also a video to a replay, so feel free to share that with your colleagues. And CPD certification is available at www.proctorgroup.com/webinar. We also have a members area, so we're doing the sales ploy now, so please sign up to that. We have a lot of information you can access. As Peter was touching on earlier, in terms of up-to-date information on products, you can actually sign up to a service on our website if you're an engineer or an architect, or if you're anyone actually, and anytime something is updated in terms of performance criteria or test certificates, etc., you will receive an email notification that something has changed. So that's us trying to reach out and make sure that our customer base is made aware of that. If you've enjoyed today, please give us a thumbs up. It does help us, and please subscribe to our channel, and that will keep you informed of anything that we have coming up. So thank you to everyone that attended. We really appreciate it. And again, thank you very much to the panel, Iain and Will as well. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it. And I hope you all have a lovely weekend. We've got beautiful sunshine up here in Scotland, which is very unusual. So hopefully it's nice where you are and you have a nice weekend. Thank you.